taking time to join the first edition of 2024. My guest is Stephan Hannemann from Embraer. He will tell us shortly a bit more about himself and Embraer. We get into the show. As always, ladies and gentlemen, you have the opportunity to participate in this dialogue at some point. So toward the end, I would open up the floor and you would be able to post your questions for us to pick up on the Q&A tab. Or if it's a comment, just drop it in the chat box and we would deal with it appropriately. Ladies and gentlemen, we have very exciting topics lined up for you today. We're going to review the state of the industry from an OEM perspective, look at what would be enablers of air transport development on the continent, consider how the next decade, just do a bit of a dip into the next decade or so and see what will be the growth drivers on the continent and how Embraer as an OEM and as a key player in the African market can support the industry in achieving this goal. Then we take that slight diversion into the technology and environmental space. As you know, we cannot talk anymore about anything without technology these days. So my guest will actually be taking up some questions on what Embraer is doing in terms of new technology development for the industry, as well as their plans for environmental sustainability. Then we look at Embraer's partnership with AFRAA, and finally, we allow our guest the opportunity to give us some food for thought as we conclude the session. We have 1 hour for today's session as in previous. And so, ladies and gentlemen, if you are ready, please sit back, relax, and enjoy our session today. So to my guest, Stephan, welcome to AFRAA Skyconnect. You must be lucky to be the first of our guests in 2024 for this show.
Very lucky indeed. Raphael, so good morning to you.
About yourself and Embraer as an organization.
Perfect, very good. There was a short delay. Good morning, Raphael, to you. Good morning, good afternoon to all of the listeners today. Great to see in the attendees chat here many familiar names, and very nice also to have new names brought onto the show. Indeed, very exciting being with you on the first call as we start into the new year. Raphael, as you outlined, we should have very interesting topics to discuss today. A few words about myself for those of you that don't know me. I've been in the industry now for almost 15 years. I had to poke myself when I was reviewing that over the weekend, but time flies very fast. One of my first jobs in the industry actually was as a baggage loader during university days in Cologne Bonn Airport. Post-graduation, I started to work at Qatar Airways in Doha as part of the network planning team, and I was actually in charge of the network planning on the African continent. And certainly that was the point in time when I really fell in love with Africa as a continent, and of course also with the African aviation industry, which I find truly exciting. There's huge opportunity out there. Then post Qatar Airways, now for almost 10 years, I've been with Embraer in various roles. Raphael, we know each other from those days. I started as a sales engineer doing the technical marketing for all of our products, so the performance analysis, economics, low-percent configurations, and I was directly supporting African airlines during that time. I did a market manager job also for a number of years for Middle East and Africa, where I was supporting the airlines more in a longer-term, medium-long-term view around fleet planning. So that was very exciting. I had a short stint. Just to conclude the journey at Embraer, a short stint in Europe as a sales job. And now since already 1.5 years, I've got the great honor to lead our sales and marketing team, working together with the airlines on the continent. And then, Raphael, as you also asked, I think it's nice to do a quick, perhaps, state of the union of Embraer. We are the third largest airframer in the world, but I think more importantly, we're the leader when it comes to regional aviation. So anything that's up to 150 seats, we are the leading manufacturer globally. We've got more than 2,000 jet aircraft today, flying with more than 130 airlines across 70 nations. So truly a global player. Zoom in on Africa, where we've been very successful these past years. We have a fleet of 220 aircraft with 60 airlines on the continent, and that's really throughout the entire product portfolio, from the ERJ to the E1 to the next generation E2, which is operated next door to you, Raphael, with your colleagues at Airpeace in Nigeria. So I think that's just a quick wrap up about myself and Embraer, and now let's dive into the conversation.
Yes, so that's very good. It's just good that you yourself, your background actually starts with your work in Africa for the African air transport industry. As you can see, there's a lot of short-haul connectivity issues on the continent. But before we delve into that, I just want to pick your brains on the state of the industry, the aviation industry in Africa, from an OEM perspective. How do you view the state?
So I think the question that we still talk about, has the market recovered, right? And I'm going to keep it very brief because there's been so much conversation about it. But just to share our point of view. So I think in terms of capacity, Africa is right up there, very close to 2019 levels. I think the passenger numbers, they're still lagging a little bit behind, but I think we at Embraer, we are confident, and I think so are all of the other forecasters, that this year is going to bring the full recovery in terms of passenger numbers. So I think that closes that topic. But I think what is more interesting, perhaps, Raphael, is that it's quite impressive around how we at Embraer managed to support the airlines on the continent growing. If you compare the fleet today versus 2019, I was just saying that the passenger numbers are still below, but we did actually grow our fleet on the continent by 15%. That's very impressive growth. And that was really across all of the product platforms that we have. So it does a number of things. First of all, it reconfirms the relevance of the regional jet segment. I think that's a very important message. Secondly, it also shows the appetite of the airlines to work together with Embraer and bring Embraer product into their fleets. And just perhaps a last point around where we are today is some of that growth was with E1 aircraft, and some of that growth also through the years was on the E2 next generation aircraft. So there is new and pre-owned aircraft coming to the market. And the last point, Raphael, is, and I think that's the more exciting part to talk about, having our, looking into the future. I think as we look into the future, I think we, and I'm not talking about the royal we as Embraer, I'm talking about all of us as the African aviation community, we can be very confident and bullish because the key ingredients, the key KPIs, they're very strong. A strong population growth is a very young population on the continent. Middle income society is growing. Industry and trade is growing. There is some initial signs of deregulation, Raphael, right? And I think this is where AFRAA, AFCAC, all of the associations together lobbying for SATAM, deregulating African skies. So when you put all of those ingredients together, we can be very confident. And just to share one or two numbers, IATA is forecasting RPK growth of 3.7% over the next decade. That's really impressive. And I can tell you other regions in the world, they're surely jealous about that growth. Europe, for instance, will only grow 2% at the same time. So IATA is positive. And at Embraer, we also do global market forecasting. So over the next 20 years, we would see around 300 next generation aircraft come to the African operators in the up to 150-seater segment. And if you combine Africa and Middle East, you're even talking about 660 aircraft that will come to the airlines, and they will replace aging aircraft. They play a great role around sustainability. And of course, they will also help around financial sustainability of the airlines. So I'm going to stop it right there.
No, that's very interesting. That the industry is looking very, very good going forward. And I'm happy to hear also from you that Embraer is in a position to really support this growth in a big way. And already you're positioning yourselves to do so. But what would you consider the growth drivers? I mean, 3.7 is impressive growth, but you know, if you look at the total volume of traffic on the African continent, that is actually punching below the belt as a continent. I think Africa can do even 10% year-on-year growth on traffic if we really implement SATAM. So what, in your opinion, would be the drivers of growth in the coming decade?
I think that's a fair point. And I think that I would immediately agree with you that the numbers could be even higher, right? Because very transparently, we're working off a lower base, right? So I do agree with you. There are certain levers that if they get pulled, we can truly unlock the opportunities on the continent. But Raphael, just to your question, I think that there are three, 4 points that would immediately come to mind around enablers/challenges. The first one is around connectivity. I was just talking about the growth on the continent. And a lot of that growth is going to be Africa to Africa traffic. And it's not necessarily going to be Africa into other regions of the world. So as those efforts that you were talking about, SATAM, deregulation, once that is really moving forward, Africans will be visiting fellow Africans. And that shouldn't be unusual. That's exactly what we've seen in other markets on the world. So connectivity, just to share with you two numbers or two comparisons. The first one is only 30% of all intra-African markets operated today are flown with a daily frequency or more. That means on the flip side that 70% of all intra-regional flights have a daily frequency or less. And that's really, you could say it's poor. I would rather be optimistic. You can say that's where a lot of the potential lies in the future. And the second point, it's not only about, when I talk about connectivity, I don't only talk about frequency. The other point is around tapping into new markets, right? And there are a lot of markets on the continent that are ripe. I think that's the ripe is the right word in terms of starting to receive direct services. We did a study last year that showed that there are, I think, 130 markets on the continent that have no direct services today, which have a market size between 10 to 50 per due. So that's a little bit of a technical term. Per due means passenger per day each way. So these markets appear small, but there are small and efficient aircraft out there. And surely Embraer and also the other manufacturers, we can support the airlines with the right solutions to untap those markets and work on connectivity. The second point, I tried to speed it up a bit, Raphael. The second point is on right sizing, right? We talk about that a lot. And I think just very briefly, load factors is just one KPI, but I think load factor is an interesting KPI to review the match of demand and supply. The load factor in Africa, globally speaking, is still the lowest, right? We're hovering in the lower 70s. Intra-regionally, we are only around 65%. And what does this mean in a simplified way? This means that too big aircraft are operated on markets. And that, of course, isn't sustainable. It's not sustainable environmentally because a bigger aircraft will burn more fuel, equally more CO2 emissions. And also, it's not sustainable from a financial point of view, right? And we have seen amazing examples on the continent with our operators, regardless if ERJ, EJet, E1, E2 operators that have truly embraced the principle of right sizing and operating with smaller equipment types.
So,
And
so
then, yeah.
if I may, just on that point, Embraer has, as you mentioned, has some of the aircraft that can actually fit into these new routes that are ready, are ripe, to use your word, to be serviced. Now, what are you doing to actually get more of your aircraft into service on the continent?
Raphael, that's a good question, and again, it's a rich question, right? I could go in various ways, but I think in a very simplified way is by being extremely close to the customers. That's through our sales and marketing team. That's through our support team around truly identifying what are the needs of the airline, right? How does their operation look like today? How does their fleet profile look like today? What are the ambitions of the airline moving forward? And then there's various ways and how we can support. One of the more natural ways on how we would be supporting those airlines is with fleet plan studies around how they can move forward. And once you've done that study and you crystallize around what is really the need of the airline, that's usually the stage when two parallel conversations start. One is around the procurement of the aircraft. Are they going to procure the aircraft directly from Embraer? Then there's a financing discussion. We'll talk about that later. And then the other way could be through working with lessor partners, right? The leasing companies have been incredibly supportive of really helping the airlines on the continent with customized solutions to procure equipment. And that's not only in Embraer, that's across all of the stakeholders. And then the second conversation is always around services and support. How can we build a solution, and ideally as low cost as possible solution, to bring those aircraft into operation, and also to see how we can support the operations throughout the years, right? And that we do with local support whenever it is possible. So having our staff with the airlines.
Wow. So now talking about local support, it's one of the concerns of African airlines that we operate a number of equipment from different providers, but oftentimes we don't have the facilities or the infrastructure here to support their maintenance. Is Embraer doing anything to ensure that we have local MRO capabilities, or is it already in place?
I think there are two thoughts that I have. The first thought is, I believe it's an absolutely self-fulfilling prophecy that as we go forward, we need to insource much more of the value stream that evolves around operating an airline, operating aircraft onto the continent, right? So I really, I'm talking about maintenance, training, pilot mechanics, having academies, aviation academies, right? I think it's very important to bring that value stream locally, because it's going to create jobs. It's going to create expertise, which right now is sometimes procured outside of Africa for top dollars, right? So that needs to happen, and Embraer is already acting on that. Just to give you a very recent example, we signed a deal with our partners Airpeace in Nigeria in September for 5 brand new E175s. As part of that deal, we will directly support the airline to build up local maintenance capabilities, right? So we're acting already, and some of the airlines, and I think that's also an important message. It's not like it's not being done. Africa has amazing role models and great examples, real trailblazers. Just to mention one of them, Ethiopian Airlines. And they don't fly any Embraer equipment, but they were very kind to invite us last year, and I was able to see their maintenance and training facility. It is absolutely state of the art. It's on the same level as any other airline on other continents, right? So others are doing that as well, and we need to see more of this. So I think that answers the first part. And then the second part is, you were just asking around how do we support the airlines. So we've got our services and support team on the continent, right? We've got a big team based in Johannesburg. And I think localizing our support as much as possible is always the way that we would choose to go, because it's much better to understand the needs of your customers. So on the maintenance side, as the fleet grew, also the solutions grew. There are now 10 MROs serving airlines on the continent. 2 of them are Embraer-approved service centers, one with Kenya Airways in Nairobi, one is with Airlink in Johannesburg. And also we've seen growth on the training infrastructure as well, where we have full flight simulators on the continent. So I'm going to hold it right there.
So now that is very good and encouraging to know that at least you have some maintenance facilities and you are supporting, or you have the capability of supporting your clients to actually establish in-house capability of maintaining their own aircraft. Now the other concern that African airlines largely have is now the procurement of the aircraft itself. Mm-hmm. Do you have any facility, or do you intervene in any way in accessing financing for your aircraft to support the airlines?
Yeah. Financing, maybe with a bold statement, financing is one of the key challenges that we continue to face. It's been a challenge in the past, and we're all trying to tackle that challenge right into the future. So aircraft financing is a very good topic we should discuss, because it's very relevant to say that the African airlines, they are acting very much around renewing their fleets, right? Especially the big carriers at this point in time and going into the future, they've taken massive orders around renewing their fleets, right? And when you renew your fleets, you will always come to the point around, how are we actually going to pay for this, right? Mm-hmm. So we have a dedicated customer finance team at Embraer for the continent. And that team is working hand in hand with the airlines and the local banks and financing partners on the continent around working on sustainable solutions. And sustainable, I mean, the solutions need to be financially sustainable as well, right? So whenever we can, we will try to promote a local African finance solution, and building those relationships. We made great, we have a great track record. Just over the last 15 months, we've had Afrexim Bank, right? An African bank, work together with BNDES to finance 3 brand new E190s going into Air Cairo. Or we had Access Bank in Nigeria financing a brand new E175 going to Overland. And Nigeria is such a huge market. There's so much potential, but financing is a challenge. And it's very good that we see these examples where it does work. And hopefully we can really harvest the fruits of that work moving forward. So that's one area around the financing. And I didn't even talk about the lessors for now.
But one of the concerns of the airlines as far as financing is concerned is actually the cost of financing. And as you know, generally, cost of everything air transport on the continent is over and above global averages. Now, financing, especially from the local sources, the interest rates are quite astronomical. So the financing might be there, but the cost to finance those aircraft could be a challenge for some aircraft, for some airlines. But at least it's good that we have some local solutions that we can leverage.
And Raphael, if yes. I may throw in just one point on this. First of all, you're right. The financing cost is too high. I'm not an expert on this, but I would say that deregulation, also countries having a real policy around aviation. I think if there's more policy making in some of those countries, I think that can support to bring down the cost. But another point I wanted to make is, and I think that's very important for all of the airline people that listen into this call, it's not necessarily about going to a brand new aircraft, right? I think it's unrealistic to consider that every airline in Africa has the financial capability and the operations supporting to go to new aircraft. And for those airlines, I think there's a clear message in the context of connectivity and right sizing there are excellent pre-owned solutions coming to the market, right? Those are young pre-owned aircraft in many cases. And this could actually, from a financial point of view, be the better way to go down the route of procuring a pre-owned aircraft or leasing pre-owned aircraft. And the lessors, now I have a chance to bring them in, the lessors have done an absolutely fantastic job, regardless if pre-owned or new equipment, to support the airlines bringing equipment in. And that's a way on how you can hedge the financing cost, right? Your lease rent will have certain contractual limitations around how much you will be paying for the lease, right? So I think that could be a great solution.
Yeah. Now, still on aircraft. Now, would you think partnership among African airlines? Because oftentimes, what my observation is that most of the aircraft on the continent are grossly underutilized in terms of aircraft operation utilization. Do you think some form of partnerships among African airlines could help them more efficiently use the equipment they have and generate more revenues instead of just operating solo?
Yeah, there was a shortcut, but I think I got the point, and I think I got the message. So I think that once the pandemic hit, I'm talking very briefly about it now, but just in the context, I really noticed that this is a global phenomena. Really, a lot of the airlines started to think about how are we going to be a more robust, more financially sustainable business going into the future, right? So a lot of the airlines, they've done a lot of thinking around strategy. The consultants, it's probably a great time to be a consultant in the aviation industry right now. But what I can tell you is, if I would have a crystal ball, I think my crystal ball would give me, first of all, it would give me a caution message. Maybe that's a very German way of starting to answer to your question. But there would be a caution message, and this is a very personal thought, is I would caution against each of the 54 African countries needing a state-owned airline that wants to become the next Ethiopian Airlines or the next KQ or the next RAM. There's no room for that. And it's going to be highly loss-making, especially for taxpayers' money. So I would shy away from that. And I feel truly that the African airlines, the African hub airlines, they've done a fantastic job of building very strong and efficient hubs. I would, that's the first message. So to go straight to your question, what would I do? If I was part of a strategy team, I think the first thing I would do is I would really try to identify, is there a niche? I would find a niche in the area where I operate. I would build that niche. And once I've built that niche successfully, having a high frequency and profitable network, that's the moment when you need to think about collaboration. And then you can collaborate with fellow African airlines, or you collaborate with some of the non-African airlines. And again, there's very good examples. Airlink and AWA, Rafael, in Ghana, right?
Yes.
Airlink flies more than 60 Embraer aircraft today. They've got 30, 40 seaters and then 30 E-jets. They've truly embraced capacity, flexibility. From Joburg and AWA from Accra with their ERJ fleet, they will go to very small markets, but with very high frequency. And it's a profitable business. And then at one point in time, they fly 4 or 5 times a day from Accra to Kumasi, or from Joburg to George, smaller markets. And of course, that attracts a lot of interest by the hub carriers, African and non-African. These markets are so small, they will never be able to go there non-stop. So then they would like to partner with those airlines. And you can partner in various ways: interlines, code shares, all the way to integration through joint venture businesses, right? So I think that could be something that could be very profitable. I'm just going to hold it on that thought.
Yeah. So now, but there's also a limitation on qualified staff in the industry today. I know it's a global problem, but it's quite acute in Africa. And anytime there's global shortage of labor, Africa tends to be the siphoning ground because we don't pay as well as other regions pay for aviation employees, especially the professional ones. And therefore, we tend to lose many of our very competent and capable staff. How can we build more capacity? Because Africa is not short of the raw labor resource. We have a lot of young teeming youth who are unemployed, looking for opportunities. How can we mold these ones into capable aviation resource, not only for the continent, but also for export?
That's a very deep question. There's a few things that come to mind. The first one is out of my own experience. When I worked at Qatar Airways, I met so many fellow Africans, extremely experienced, very talented, right? So brain drain is the reality, right? And it happens in other parts of the world as well. And I'm going to be honest here. I'm not an economist, so I'm not going to be able to give you now the one answer that's going to cure it. But yeah. I will share with you what are my personal thoughts. And my personal thoughts is we need to really make the aviation industry locally in Africa much more appealing, right? We need to think long term, and we need to think about localizing the value stream, right? I think I just talked about that before briefly. Too much of the services that are required by operating an airline and operating aircraft are constantly being outsourced outside of the continent, right? And those tend to be sometimes very highly skilled jobs, right? Maintenance is actually, if you compare it, working on an aircraft, that's a pretty highly skilled job. But I'm convinced this could all be done on the continent, right? So I think that at the end of the day, it needs not so much perhaps the aircraft manufacturer. I tell you what we can do, but I think this needs also the vision of the airline CEOs around building up a sustainable airline into the future that can provide those jobs, that really insources the value stream very close to where the airline operates. As a manufacturer, there's a few things that we can do. I'm not going to talk about all of them, but I will talk about one of them. As you start the partnership with Embraer and you take delivery of aircraft, there comes a certain entitlement, right? In terms of training, right? Yeah. And that's, of course, for us is a great opportunity locally with the airlines to pass on that knowledge. I think, though, with what you just said, I'm going to think about that post the call a little bit further, is I think we should question ourselves, how do we ensure that that knowledge that gets transferred to the continent will stay on the continent, right? I think we could probably fill another hour. It's very interesting, but I think those would be my thoughts on this very challenging topic, yeah.
Now, most of the world regions actually are diversifying the business model. In other words, they have the legacy carriers, they have LCCs, they have hybrid models. In Africa, we largely just still operate the low-cost, the legacy model. I mean, and as if the other models would not work in Africa. What do you think is the problem?
I think around the low, I can directly answer on the low cost model, perhaps. I think low cost actually is now starting. It is starting to work. In some, Africa is huge, right? So I think to generalize, to say it's not working, I would advocate against. I think it is working in some of the markets. In South Africa, for instance, I think we've seen strong low cost operators. We've seen in North Africa as well a few examples, Air Arabia, Morocco. We've seen examples in Egypt. And I think, first of all, every airline should be low cost, right? Regardless if it's airline or any business should be low cost. If you have a high cost business, that's challenging to justify, right? So everyone needs to be low cost. And of course, the passengers would like to see the low fares, right? Yeah. But there's a problem. Why are low fares not really possible in Africa? And that was actually a point, Raphael, I'm happy you brought it up. I love listening to Kamil from IATA. He recently said that pre-pandemic, after each flight, if you look at profit as a Big Mac, on every seat there would be a Big Mac. Right now, and it's still driven by the pandemic to some extent and supply chain challenges. Right now, when the plane lands after 2-3 hours flying, there's no Big Mac there. There is negative Big Macs, right? And some of that issue is, so airlines overall on the continent are heavily loss-making in some extenses, right? And I have to side with them because I think it is because airlines on the continent face obnoxiously high cost levels, right? The cost of operating an airline in Africa is the highest across the whole world. Fuel, in most cases, tends to be double the global average, right? This is an AFRAA statistic, airports and passenger handling, more than double global average, right? So it is, and the taxation is incredibly high. Air navigation charges are incredibly high. So it is very difficult to be a CEO or CFO of an airline in Africa to run a profitable business. And I think this is where AFRAA, as a strong body representing the airlines, together with the partners, Embraer and the other stakeholders, I think we need to start talking about that more and more, right? Because some of those cost levels is pure protectionism. And I think we should talk about it, you know? And that could be a way to make the airlines more profitable. When the airlines are more profitable, there will be more services. Eventually, fares will go down, and it's going to be a great ecosystem. More people will travel. So I think that's one area that I have on my mind.
You know, there's always this thought that, okay, is it the chicken before the egg? And that look, should the fares fares come down first before the service provider lower their cost, or they should lower their cost first before fares come down? So it's actually quite difficult to really draw the line or who starts this first. But because airlines generate revenue from carrying passengers and they eventually pay everybody else before they pay themselves, if there's anything left at all, then airlines are always holding the short end of the stick. But on this particular area, so if, for instance, if we were to engage with some of the stakeholders, they also say, look, in some cases, traffic volumes are just not there. And if you've traveled Africa, and I'm sure you see the volumes in some airports. However, the infrastructure requirements at every airport is literally the same. Whether you're carrying 500,000 passengers or you're carrying 10 million passengers, you might basically require a similar infrastructure, particularly for navigation and for ground operations. But yet, you are not generating equivalent revenue. So airports then tend to charge a higher fee, taking advantage of the fewer passengers that are coming to the airport. So passengers suffer as a result of this. Now, how can this cost be borne by who can bear this cost anyway? So that we can operate much more cost effectively.
I think sometimes it's interesting to also look at this situation that we just discussed. This has happened already around the world in some regions at some other points in time, right? Now, I'm from Europe, so I've seen the growth of the low costers like EasyJet and Ryanair. So my response is actually quite direct because I've seen how it worked here. And the way that it worked in Europe was these airlines, they went to the airports, they went to the regions, and they said, I'm going to put in a service 3, 4, 5 times a week, but you need to do X, Y, Z around subsidizing the start of the operations. Reducing or completely cutting the handling charges, the taxation, perhaps even subsidizing the route, right? So I've seen that happen, and I think it's not copy-paste. It's certainly not copy-paste, but I think this could be an approach, right? So I do not believe, and it would be very unfortunate because we would have the exact same conversation in 10 years from today. If airports and navigation service providers and governments continue the way that they are doing right now in terms of the charges, it is going to be very difficult to convince airlines to start flying to those markets, right? So that's one point. The other point that I would like to mention is that, and that's when we were talking about right sizing, right? There's two big aircraft that are flown. And when those two big aircraft are being operated today, the problem is that the routes, many of the routes that they fly, they're heavily loss-making. If a route is loss-making, if you're the airline, you will not increase frequency, right? Actually, you're considering to pull out of the market. So again, I would just very clearly like to make the point. As the airlines move forward, taking those fleet decisions, I think it's really important around discussing right sizing. Will you actually be able to fill the aircraft with minimum 80% load factor throughout the year? That's usually what you need to be profitable year round. And if you're not, then you should consider other aircraft options, regardless if new or pre-owned.
Yeah. So in this particular context, I think we could spend more time on this, but we do that another time. For now, let's just move on to some of the questions that are coming in before we go on to the last segment of our discussion. And the first question is from an anonymous attendee, and what he's asking is Embraer investing in the African youth to support the aviation industry? Do you have any programs ongoing that are helping to train more Africans to get into the industry?
The short answer is yes. So some of the partnerships that we've had on the continent would be, we all know FADI very well. So YAPA, I think the Young African Airline Association supporting youth. So we have, as Embraer, supported her with this very important project, if you may want to call it, or development. So we've supported FADI in the past. Also, we had an outreach in South Africa that we participate in, and then we spend time with school kids talking about aviation, trying to get them excited. But as a father of two small kids as well, I feel there's a lot more that can be done and that needs to be done, right? So perhaps I'm gonna. That's my quick response on the matter.
Great, thanks. Now, Adikini is also asking whether Embraer seems to have an aircraft that meets the connectivity needs, largely meets the connectivity needs of African regional operations. Are there medium to long-term plans by Embraer to set up a plant on the continent to actually assemble some aircraft here and thereby transfer technology?
I'm really being put on the spot here, but I think I'm gonna give you a response that is common sense, right?
Yeah.
So actually, the first part I would like to say is there are some great technologies in terms of also the supplier landscape coming from the continent, right? Countries such as Morocco, they've really positioned themselves extremely well to become suppliers to aircraft platforms, right? So I think that's something important already. Local manufacturing, and that comes onto the airframe. And Embraer, we're always open to review that, right? If there's a great match in terms of the quality and the supply and also pricing, everything needs to match up, then of course, why wouldn't we discuss it? With regards to the final assembly line, that would certainly be a personal dream of mine. And I think if the market really continues and will really grow very strongly and the volumes are there, I hope I'm not going to say anything that's going to get me into trouble, but I would always say you always need to be open to discuss and review, right?
Yeah.
So that would be my response.
Excellent. Now, there's another question from Sege, and Sege is saying, what is the biggest aircraft Embraer has produced, and how many seats has this aircraft?
Very good. So, Sergey, on the legacy E-Jet line, which you're very familiar with, that flies with Airlink, KQ, RAM, and so on and so forth, the biggest member is the E195 E1, and that aircraft can transport all the way to 124 seats. Now, on the next generation, the aircraft that you can see here behind me, that's the E195 E2. The E2 family is a completely new aircraft family stemming from the E1 generation. It's going to have 3 family members. It has 3 family members because it's a reality. It's got the E175 E2, around 90 seats. The E190 E2, it's got around 110 seats, single class. And then the biggest one is the E195 E2. And this aircraft can seat up to 146 passengers. And just another point, sorry, now it's a little bit of salesy now.
Yeah.
This aircraft has unbeatable economics. This aircraft has 20 to 25% lower unit cost versus a next generation narrow body at the same cost per seat. So it's truly an incredible machine.
Wow, that's exciting. We look forward to it coming on stream and then having it on the continent. But tell me, has Embraer got any cargo aircraft on the market, or do you have plans to come?
Yes, we have, and that's something that is really happening right now. There's going to be a lot of things happening through 2024. So taking a quick step back, and I think this comes, Raphael, to diversifying your business, right? So
yes,
something that we've seen is there was a massive growth in e-commerce, right? The Amazons, books online, and so on of the world, and that trend is going to continue. And when you purchase something online, at least that's for me, maybe for many others as well, I want it delivered immediately, right? Or as fast as possible. So I think some of the cargo integrators or the airlines that also sell cargo space, they are operating now in a new environment where there is this demand around getting the shipments much quicker. And at Embraer, we've identified that there is a gap in the existing cargo solutions, a gap in terms of volume and efficiency between the turboprop freighters and between the narrow body freighters. So that's why Embraer is developing the E1 freighter. It's the legacy E190 and E195, which is going to go into a P2F, a passenger to freighter conversion, which is a service bulletin from Embraer and also available in the leasing market. And I think it's going to be a highly interesting proposition to the African cargo airlines. Astral Aviation, if I may mention one name, we have great dialogue with Sanjeev and the team around moving forward as potentially becoming the first operator on the continent. And we will fly the aircraft for the first time in the next weeks. And we will deliver it to the first customer still through this year. So it's something that's really happening right now.
Okay, thanks so much for that. Now, let's go to our last 2 points. We have about 10 minutes to round up. The first point is about new technology. You just talked to us about the E195 E2, which is very exciting in terms of operational cost. Now, what is Embraer doing in terms of technological innovation in the aircraft manufacturing space as one side, and how or what is Embraer's program on environmental sustainability for this industry?
Well, first of all, the topic of sustainability, environmental sustainability, is going to be the topic of our professional lifetimes, right? Anyone on this call, by the day we leave this planet, this is still going to be the biggest topic, and it really has to be. And I don't need to talk about climate change right now, but as an industry, we are committed, and that's the airlines, that's all of the stakeholders, that's Embraer, of course, as well, to meet the net zero targets by 2050. Something before I start talking about technologies, I want to say, and that's a personal thought, is at conferences, sometimes we talk about the aviation industry only contributes 2.5% of the global greenhouse gases. And 2.5% we are always saying that's not even that bad, right? The problem is other industries are decarbonizing a lot faster. I could talk about this now very long, but what I would just like to say is this means that we really need to act, and we need to act now. The second point is meeting those targets that's an effort across all of the stakeholders, right? And the public eye always only looks at the airlines, and the airlines are already doing great things to reduce emissions. It's really all of the stakeholders, right? Regardless if it's airports moving to more renewable energies, regardless if it's the navigation service providers, right? Air traffic management. Are there ways to fly more non-stop rather than flying like this and burning a lot of fuel? So that's the second point. And then the third point to talk about technology, I want to talk about 3 points. The technology today, in the future, and I want to talk about sustainable aviation fuel. The technology to really reduce carbon emissions is already available today by all of the manufacturers, right? On the Embraer side, we just talked about it, that's the E2. And of course, that is a fantastic way to airlines with the existing technology to reduce carbon emissions all the way 25 to 30% just by replacing aging aircraft. 48% of the African fleet up to 150 seats is more than 20 years old. So airlines will be taking decisions very soon. And African airlines have actually done a great job around replacing inefficient aircraft with more efficient aircraft. And let's remember, CO2 emissions are directly linked to the fuel burn of an aircraft. So that's it on new technologies. There was something else, but I think it's going to go into too much detail. Now, Raphael, thinking about what's coming ahead in the future, right? Of course, Embraer, we're an engineering company. We're reviewing what are the potential solutions that will become available into the future. And there we've got a concept that we're studying. It's the Energia concept of flight. It's highly interesting. It's ranging from 9 to 50 seats. We're reviewing different propulsion systems that are available today or that will be available in the future. Just to share a little bit with you, we're talking about hybrid electric all the way to full electric flight. We're talking about gas turbine, fuel cell, and it's a very exciting concept phase that we're in right now through advisory boards where we talk to the airlines and we really map their needs. What's the need in terms of capacity, in terms of range, in terms of economics? And I'm sure we're going to hear a lot more from Energia as we go forward. I see that Raphael has left us, but I will just conclude before I lose my train of thought on the last topic, which is sustainable aviation fuel. It is absolutely clear to me that if there's more scale, and certainly there will be more scale in SAF in terms of local production, increasing production, local availability of SAF, and also, of course, the affordability, the price of SAF coming down into the future, that can be a fantastic way to support around the net zero 50 by 2050 targets. And the E2, I think that's interesting for the tech nerds on the call here. We're going to certify the E2 to 100% SAF operation with passengers until the end of the decade. So we're working with the authorities. We've done trial flights without passengers, no issues. So this is something that works. So I think that probably summarizes the sustainability conversation.
Okay, that's interesting. So you are on course just as the on the like the global to attaining the global net zero emissions by 2050. That's all good, and we are happy that as an OME, you guys are taking this very seriously and trying to help the operators to be able to manage our operating costs as well as our environmental impact and footprint. So just briefly on our last point, then we take a few more questions. I see there are 2 more questions that we need to take before we go. Now, Embraer has been one of the long-standing AFRAA member partners. Now, how do you view that relationship that you have developed over the years with AFRAA? How is it serving you as an OEM?
It's a very valuable relationship for us. And I think there's a lot of work that has been done through the last years and decades, where Embraer, together with AFRAA, we were working on some of the common goals and points. But I think the point in the short time we've left, Raphael, that I think is much more important is AFRAA is very important because African airlines need strong representation. I think that's really something that is very important to state, because our aviation industry is always in the center of the public eye, and that's happening all around the world, right? So especially around the conversations on sustainability, for all the right and sometimes all the wrong reasons, it's really straight in the center. And the airlines are doing great things already around meeting those net zero targets. But I think it's very important that airlines can count on AFRAA, which they do as a strong representation on matters as sustainability, SATAM. We talk very little about SATAM today. And why is that? Because it's a no-brainer. SATAM needs to happen because we've seen that there will be the upsides will far outweigh the downsides, right? And then there's other topics like safety. And I think here great improvements were made. So we're very proud of the partnership that we have with AFRAA.
Yes, thank you so much. In fact, there's one more question, and this is related to the environmental discussion that we just had. Again, Adikini wants to know what your thoughts are about use of renewable energy on the African continent, and how we can ensure a timely adoption on the African continent.
That's a very good question, and thank you very much for it. I was already alluding to it a little bit. I talked about the fact that sustainable aviation fuel is an absolute no-brainer to have a very meaningful contribution on reducing the greenhouse gases, and it's a technology that will work. The challenge, as I think the person that asked the question has highlighted, is around there needs to be more local production of SAF, right? There needs to be more availability. It does not help if an airline has the equipment and says, hey, I would love to do it. If SAF is not available locally, or if it's too expensive, you know, it's going to be difficult to increase the usage of SAF. But again, like with some of the other points I mentioned, very good example on the continent. To mention Morocco and Ethiopia, those are two countries that on a country political level, they have strategically decided to invest into increasing SAF production on the continent, right? So those initial examples, they're there. And I'm sure as we go forward, there will be others to follow. So I will hold it right there.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much. And now to conclude, I want to thank all our questioners for the questions that came in. Our time is up, but I cannot let you go until you have given us some food for thought. What is your message, your parting message to our audience, who up till now still stand at some 67 people listening to us, listening and watching us around the world?
Very good. My three key takeaways are: the first one is, we, as the African aviation industry, we can be confident and bullish about the period that is ahead of us. We talked a lot about the challenges, which of course remain, and we need to tackle those. But overall, we can be very bullish and confident. The second point is, the growth is going to be on the continent. There will be much more Africans traveling to neighboring Africans or domestically. That's where the growth is going to be. And I'm convinced that if the airlines tilt their strategy more around finding a niche, building a niche in terms of strong networks, high frequency, those are the first 2 points. And then the last point, I'm going to be very brief, is the matter of sustainability. It's right now. We need to act now. I don't think more needs to be said. So I think those would be my three key takeaways.
Okay, thank you very much. To my audience, I wish to say thank you very much for making time to join us today. Sorry about the intermittent internet disruptions, especially from my end and the initial stages, and just the recent one from Stephan's side. We apologize for that. We'll try and fix this and make sure subsequently we have a smooth run. Until next month, when we bring you another guest on AFRAA Skyconnect, I wish to thank you all and I wish you a blessed day. Stephan, nice day, and thank you very much for your time. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Take care. See you all very soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.